This is BBC One. Now the news with Hugh Edwards.
The Queen gives heartfelt thanks for the tributes to her late mother. Keeping vigil this evening, the Queen Mother's 4 grandsons. And still the crowds are gathering. This is the scene tonight at Westminster. Also today, the IRA puts another batch of its weapons beyond use. And the pounding goes on in the Middle East. Israel again defies the orders of President Bush.
Tonight on BBC London News, a 15-year-old boy is airlifted to hospital after being stabbed outside a North London school. And miles, not metres, the men defacing London's metric road signs.
Good evening. The Queen has expressed thanks for all the public support as the royal family comes to terms with the death of the Queen Mother. In a televised address, the Queen has just said that she'd been overwhelmed by so many acts of kindness and respect since her mother's death 9 days ago. So far, 160,000 people are believed to have filed past the Queen Mother's body, which is lying in state at Westminster Hall. The queues are still stretching for miles this evening. Queen Mother's 4 grandsons have also offered their own personal tribute, as our royal correspondent Jenny Bond now tells us.
It was their personal tribute to their grandmother. In the medieval setting of Westminster Hall, on this, the eve of her funeral, her 4 grandsons prepared to mount a vigil beside her coffin. Prince Charles and the Duke of York wore their naval uniforms. The Earl of Wessex and Viscount Linley were in mourning dress. But it was with military precision that they took up their positions, replacing the company of archers who had been standing guard before them. It was a scene reminiscent of the night 66 years ago, when the 4 sons of George V stood vigil around his coffin. Now the old king's great-grandchildren were doing the same for their grandmother. At each corner of her coffin they stood, heads bowed, in silent vigil, as members of the public watched. There to support their father, Prince William and Prince Harry. The Princess Royal and the Countess of Wessex were there as well. And, significantly, Camilla Parker Bowles was invited by Prince Charles. She'll also be at the funeral tomorrow. Earlier, a group of Chelsea pensioners were among the mourners, slowly filing past the coffin of their wartime queen. Old soldiers who remember her contribution during those dark years and who now came to pay their last respects. Though most were some 20 years the Queen Mother's junior, many were frail and needed a helping hand. All, though, were determined to honour her memory in style. Her links with the Chelsea pensioners went back over decades, and this was their moment to repay her loyalty. Some recalled how she'd always have a word for them at her birthday celebrations outside Clarence House.
She's been the most gracious lady now, ever since the war. And we thought we'd have to pay our last respects to her. And on the last time we met her on her 101st birthday, she went by us on her buggy, and then she said to the driver, "Stop, stop, go back, I want to talk to my gentleman."
Outside Westminster Abbey, the number of people camping out ahead of tomorrow's funeral is gradually growing.
I've always thought that people that stayed out at night and got freezing cold are idiots, but I just wanted to be here.
And late this afternoon, the Princess Royal and her family did their bit to thank the many people who are still queuing to view the Queen Mother's coffin. They went to the far side of the river, where the crowd still face a wait of several hours to express their gratitude, reinforcing the Queen's words of thanks for the honour that's been given to the Queen Mother in death. Jenny Bond, BBC News.
Well, this evening, the crowds are still out in force, waiting to file into Westminster Hall. And let me show you the scene right now, high above Westminster and the River Thames. The line of people waiting to get into the Palace of Westminster stretches along the opposite bank of the river. Police are warning of a 5-hour wait at least. Westminster Hall, they say, will finally close its doors for this purpose at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Now, as many of you will no doubt have seen a few moments ago, the Queen said that her mother had been blessed with a long and happy life. Here's a reminder of what the Queen had to say to the nation.
My family and I always knew what she meant for the people of this country, and the special place she occupied in the hearts of so many here, in the Commonwealth, and in other parts of the world. But the extent of the tribute that huge numbers of you have paid my mother in the last few days has been overwhelming. I have drawn great comfort from so many individual acts of kindness and respect.
Let's go to the Palace of Westminster this evening. Our royal correspondent Jenny Bond is there. Jenny, the clear message from the Queen talking about tomorrow, saying that she hopes that sadness will blend with a wider sense of thanksgiving.
Yes, I think she's giving a signal there that, it's time for us to move on and start celebrating the Queen Mother's life. I thought it was a very composed performance, as you expect from the Queen, a measured performance. She's not one to show her emotions in public, and least of all in front of a television screen. But I do think that it showed the great affection in which she held her mother. She spoke, as Prince Charles spoke, of the Queen Mother's infectious zest for living, and let us know that it was really the affection of people everywhere that inspired her mother. And that's really why the Queen chose to give this message to the nation, because she wants to give thanks to all the people who are still queuing outside. She has, as she said, been not only deeply moved by it, but in fact overwhelmed by it.
Some of those who queued for hours this afternoon, Jenny, will have been lucky enough to see the vigil of the 4 grandsons. Tell us a little more about that.
Yes, a lucky moment for those who were in there for those 20 minutes. It was a most poignant tribute to their grandmother. I'm told it's something Prince Charles certainly, and his brothers, and really wanted to do, that he was feeling very proud to take his place at the side of the coffin. And I'm also told that he too is beginning to turn that corner, and though tomorrow will of course be a day of great sadness, he's, in someone's words, someone close to him, more together at least than he was last week.
Jenny, as ever, thank you very much. And a little later in tonight's programme, we'll be hearing from some of those who've spent the day queuing to pay their respects. But let's have a look at the day's other news now. The IRA says it's put another batch of its weapons beyond use. It says it wants to stabilise, sustain and strengthen the peace process in Northern Ireland. It's not known exactly what's been destroyed, but officials say it includes a substantial quantity of ammunition, arms and explosives. With tonight's 6 o'clock briefing, here's our Ireland correspondent, Dennis Murray.
This second act of decommissioning had been widely predicted. The only issue was when it would happen rather than if it would. And while a second step perhaps lacks the impact of the first, the fact that the IRA has again put weapons beyond use is highly significant. In its statement, the IRA said the decision to decommission was unilateral and taken by its leadership. It also described it as an initiative taken so that the peace process can be stabilised, sustained and strengthened. It also accepted that such a move caused difficulties for Republicans. The head of the decommissioning body, who's witnessed the 2 acts of putting weapons beyond use, pointed to the significance of the language he used in his report.
The word varied indicates that within the terms of arms, ammunition, explosive material, there is a variety, and we believe the quantity was substantial.
So why has the IRA decided to take this action now? Many point to the imminent general election campaign in the Irish Republic, where Sinn Féin's hoping to do well. But the party's president was emphatic that that was not a factor.
People need to start believing what the IRA says when it gives us its motivation, the reasons it has given. This issue is too serious, too deadly serious, too crucial to become a mere election stunt.
What next then for the peace process itself? The main unionist party is satisfied the IRA is now committed to a process and wants to see action on the guns from the other side of the divide.
Now that we've got a process of decommissioning coming from Republicans, that loyalists must realise that there is now an even more urgent need for them to start their own process.
The future of the devolved administration at Stormont is now much more secure. The problem which once dogged the process at least beginning to recede. Dennis Murray, BBC News, Belfast.
To the Middle East now, and no sign yet that Israel is going to do as President Bush demands. Mr. Bush said again this evening that the Israeli forces should withdraw without delay from Palestinian areas. There's been fierce fighting across the West Bank today, with many casualties on both sides. In Nablus, Israeli sources now say around 100 Palestinians have surrendered, and in Jenin, up to 100 Palestinians have been killed and at least 9 Israeli soldiers shot dead during fierce fighting in the town's refugee camp. Our Middle East correspondent, Jeremy Cook, reports from the outskirts.
The latest deadly salvo in Israel's increasingly secret war. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon has branded this city a viper's nest of terror. Now, with cameras and reporters kept well back, Jenin is taking a pounding. You can tell by the smoke that the fighting is centered around the refugee neighborhood, a hotbed of Islamic militants. For the Israelis, this is payback for suicide bombings, but at a high price. Their wounded are airlifted to hospital. At least 9 soldiers have been killed in the ground offensive. It's bad, but Palestinians living in the city say they're counting their casualties by the dozen. And so for days now, the Israeli helicopter gunships have been carrying out wave after wave of attacks against Jenin. And already both sides here are talking about this as the most intense fighting since Ariel Sharon launched his offensive. It's impossible for us to get inside the city to find out exactly what is happening, but many Palestinians inside are talking about a bloodbath. Our repeated attempts to enter Jenin met with predictable results. For the Red Cross too, these are frustrating times. They've also heard of many Palestinian wounded and killed, but reaching the casualties has proved impossible.
We don't know, we have no ability to contact people inside the camp because the electricity is down. That's why we have no telephone. That's all I can say to you. We really don't know what's happening inside.
And there's been still more fighting in Bethlehem. Fire, bloodshed and death on the doorstep of one of Christianity's most holy sites. Jeremy Cook, BBC News, near Jenin.
Tonight, the American Secretary of State Colin Powell has arrived in the Middle East on his latest mission to broker some sort of deal. He's meeting King Mohammed in Morocco before going on to Jerusalem later in the week. He says he hopes to meet Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat if the opportunity presents itself. In Iraq, President Saddam Hussein has suspended oil exports for at least 30 days in protest at Israel's attacks on Palestinian areas. Earlier, he gave a defiant response to a warning from the United States and Britain that he could face renewed military action. Saddam said Iraq would fight back with all possible means. And the Prime Minister has returned from his weekend meeting with President Bush, where they discussed Iraq. Mr Blair's remarks have been immediately criticised by some Labour MPs who oppose any move to widen the campaign against terror beyond Afghanistan. Let's go to Downing Street and talk to our political correspondent there, Mark Mardell. Mark, can we say once and for all whether Mr Blair is really backing Mr Bush's plans for Iraq, or is all this window dressing?
Well, he does seem to be backing them very hard indeed, but it's also noticeable that as the Prime Minister's rhetoric, his words hardened on Iraq, so President Bush's words hardened on Israel. And Downing Street would at least like us to believe that there's some sort of payoff there, that the Prime Minister is somebody who can put a restraining hand on President Bush and explain to him really how the world is interconnected, which is what a lot of his speech was actually about.
Well, is that restraining hand likely to reassure the pockets of Labour MPs who clearly are very uncomfortable about this?
Well, it's a really tough job, and he's going to have a go at it on Wednesday. He's going to try to persuade them. I think his only hope is if he persuades them that America is really, really serious about peace in the Middle East, then they might let him have a go at Iraq, but not until then.
All right, Mark, thanks very much. Time, 16 minutes past 6. In a few moments, the teenage crime story. Violence is a part of life, they say.
And join me on board this giant floating apartment block where it can cost you £5 million to book a place.
Later on BBC London News, we'll have a full guide on where to be and when if you don't want to miss the Queen Mother's funeral. And Arsenal striker Kanu brings London's football stars together to celebrate his Heart Foundation.
Violence is a part of life for many teenagers. That's the finding of a major new study throughout Britain. Nearly half of all young people say they've broken the law at least once. Well, for more on this, let's join our Home Affairs correspondent, Margaret Gilmore, who's in Cardiff this evening. Margaret, what's the picture there?
Well, it was a massive survey, 14,000 secondary school children interviewed. This, combined with what teenagers here in Cardiff have been telling us, shows what a big problem youth crime is. 49% of 11 to 16-year-olds admitted they'd broken the law at some point in their lives. 25% of males aged 15 to 16 said they'd had a knife or a weapon in the past year. 50% admitted binge drinking. And a small but significant number said they took drugs. The survey reflects the sad extremes. This 11-year-old, one of the statistics. He made his 150th court appearance today here in Cardiff. His crimes range from car theft to burglary. He's too young to be identified or locked up. Out on the streets, every teenager we spoke to knew gangs at school or on housing estates who thrive on crime. These girls mix in circles that stay out of trouble, but say some other groups think being involved in crime is cool.
Well, it's just the way some people are now. I mean, some people, they just get away with murder. Their parents don't try and stop them, so it's...
Do you know people like that?
Yes.
Well, I know quite a few people that have, you know, committed crimes, and it's just, I think it's like seen as accepted sort of more, and I don't think there's like harsher like punishment.
Well, 50%.
50%,
yeah.
You reckon?
Well, in my school, I'm saying, no.
What, commit crimes?
Yeah.
What sort?
Well, car theft, burglary, and same as you said, drugs.
The survey also revealed the extent of alcohol abuse amongst teenagers. They start at 11. By 16, nearly half admit binge drinking. That's drinking more than 5 units in a session. The report says this is more worrying than drug abuse, which affects fewer than 10% of 11 to 16-year-olds.
I think we need to reevaluate our attitude to young people and alcohol. There is evidence in the report that the attitudes of parents and other adults is much more relaxed in relation to young people and alcohol than the potential damage that it can do really justifies.
The report warns it matters because those who drink often turn to crime or have health problems. There is an element that will boast they've committed a crime even if they haven't, but the survey was so big this is unlikely to affect the overall findings. And there is some good news. If just under 15% say they've broken the law, then more than 50% have not.
Indeed. Margaret, thank you very much. Classmates of the missing teenager Amanda Dowler returned to school today after the Easter break. Educational psychologists were on hand to help some pupils distressed by their friend's continued absence. Amanda, who's also known as Millie, disappeared 18 days ago while walking home in Walton-on-Thames.
For Amanda Dowler's fellow pupils at Heathside School in Weybridge, their return after Easter was far from ordinary. The absence of the lively, popular girl they all knew as Millie had left a painful gap. The 13-year-old had left her last lesson here on March the 21st to return home to Walton-on-Thames. But despite huge publicity and a massive police search, she hasn't been seen since. For her classmate friends, the thought of her empty chair was distressing. Jess used to sit next to Millie.
Everyone's just going to be hoping that when we go into school today that she's going to be sitting there in her normal space, being her normal self. But it's just going to be really hard for people.
Just come home, phone anyone. Just let us know where you are, because we want you back.
The local education authority had taken steps to care for both pupils and teachers who might be upset.
We've got 2 educational psychologists available in the school who are experienced in dealing with traumatic incidents, who are here to give first aid, psychological support.
Specialist police teams have continued their extensive ground search, but 18 days on, the whereabouts of Millie remain undiscovered. Clarence Mitchell, BBC News, Surrey.
One of the world's biggest media companies has filed for insolvency after running up debts of more than £4 billion. The Kirsch Group is Germany's biggest commercial broadcaster and runs a pay TV service with exclusive rights to many of the top sporting events, including the next 2 football World Cups. Now, a British man accused of fighting with the Taliban and held by the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan for some 4 years has returned home following a long campaign by his family. Anwar Khan from Burnley was questioned by anti-terrorist police when he arrived at Manchester Airport, but was later released. Kevin Bouquet has the story.
back home with his family after 4 years in an Afghan prison cell. Anwar Khan was arrested by Northern Alliance warlords and held as a suspected Taliban fighter.
I'm very happy. I mean, it's beyond explanation. How I can't explain my feelings.
How grateful to your brother, Ajmal?
Well, I can say I can give my head for him. So, you know, you can take it from there.
I don't want your head, I want you alive.
Anwar Khan had gone to Pakistan in the late 90s to try to recover from his addiction to heroin. Then he went to Afghanistan and joined the Taliban army. After his capture, there were many months when his family heard nothing about him. Anwar Khan's friends and family here in Burnley fought for years to get him released. One of their main objectives was to persuade the Foreign Office to intervene with the leaders of the Northern Alliance.
A Foreign Office or a proper government would not deal with warlords, because Afghanistan is full of warlords, and even still. And that was their main difficulty.
But with the Taliban defeated and the Northern Alliance in power, the way was clear to negotiate Anwar's release and return home. He's now being treated in hospital for the physical injuries he received at the hands of his captors. But his family fear the psychological effects of his experiences will remain for the rest of his life. Kevin Bakay, BBC News, Burnley.
Now, it's the dream holiday for lots of people, of course, a leisurely cruise on a luxury liner. But for some, it is a way of life. A ship called the World has docked in London's Greenwich and is attracting interest because it's a floating home for rich people who say they just want to sail the seas. Robert Hall is on board. What's it like, Robert?
Well, it's pretty amazing, Hugh, but it wasn't always the case. I mean, there was a time when skeptics said this £200 million project was just an impossible dream. But here is the World, 40,000 tonnes of her, 12 decks high. Now, that means that I'm speaking to you now from over 100 feet above the waterline. Tomorrow, the World sets sail. Today, the estate agents have been on board, hoping to attract international attention. Only the very rich need apply. Dwarfing the riverside housing, the vessel that's billed not as a ship, but as a way of life. An experience of ultimate luxury from the moment passengers step onto its thick pile carpets. Potential buyers will need between £1 and £5 million. They'll also have to satisfy the ship's owners that they'll get on with their neighbours. Jeff Thompson and Karen Planet were among the first to pass those tests. They'll spend up to 7 months a year on board.
Our home base was in California. We looked at other places, like we thought Sydney would be fun and Buenos Aires would be fun, and we started looking at other places. But then when this came along, we thought, well, this is terrific because this can be our home, but we can be in all those places.
Life on the ship is as you'd expect, from the stern restaurant that becomes a yacht marina to the shopping arcade where you could part with £300,000 for one item. And on the upper decks, a complete miniature golf course. Real grass, plus an opportunity to practice your drives on a most unusual fairway. The ship will visit 120 ports in 46 countries this year. At the helm, a man who has a unique claim to fame.
When I meet the President of the United States, he will shake my hand and he'll say, I'm the President of the United States, my name is Bush. And I'll say, my name is Captain Hashem, I'm the master of the world.
More than 3/4 of the apartments have now been sold. A chance to see the world, if you so wish, without leaving home. Well, there is, of course, another advantage. At least some of those on board will see a distinct reduction in their annual tax bill. Another reason for lying back, sipping the champagne. They may have paid the earth for their apartment, but their postcard can come from the top of the world. Hugh.
Robert, thank you very much. Who needs the master of the world? We have the master of the weather here.
Thank you very much indeed, Hugh. You and I could share a broom cover, perhaps. Weather-wise, I think it's going to stay dry in central London tomorrow, but there will be a chilly breeze. In the next few days, it's the north of the country that probably has the rain from time to time. Southern areas remain rather as they are. Fair amount of sunshine, but that cool breeze. We have some cloud across the north at the moment. That'll be more or less heading out into the North Sea, but a finger of it, I think, will feed in towards eastern parts of England. And we'll also have some patches of cloud here and there, a little bit of fog too. The main thing about tonight is it's going to be a jolly cold night. There will be a widespread frost. That is away from the coast and the more southern parts of the country where there'll be a fairly stiff breeze. Tomorrow then we start with this cloud in these more eastern parts of England. I think it'll thin and break a little bit during the course of the day. The sun will come punching through, but at the same time there might just about be an odd shower. Also some thicker cloud coming into the northwest of Scotland, but everywhere else bright with some sunshine, but rather on the chilly side, especially in the east. Hugh.
Michael, thanks very much. Main news tonight again. The Queen's tribute on the eve of her mother's funeral. Within the past half hour, she's thanked the crowds who've been queuing for hours to pay their respects at Westminster Hall.
I thank you for the support you are giving me and my family as we come to terms with her death and the void she has left in our midst. I thank you also from my heart for the love you gave her during her life and the honour you now give her in death.
And tonight, thousands are again queuing on the banks of the Thames for their last chance to pay tribute to the Queen Mother. Gavin Hewitt has been to talk to some of those who've been waiting very patiently.
The crowds bunched on the steps of Westminster Hall have impressed and surprised the palace. Many had made the journey, even though on previous days people had waited for 5 or 6 hours. Just occasionally there is grief. But that's not the general mood here. Curiosity mingles with respect. Many, like Lois Greenough, are convinced royalists. She's filed past the coffin twice already and is in line again with her grandson.
We are British and we're very royal people. We believe in the royalty. I think that's the thing.
For others, this journey is about being part of history, about being there.
I'm quite a royalist, and it's something that, I don't know, it's something that I wanted to do, pass on to my grandchildren, so that I've actually been here.
Among the crowds flowing over Lambeth Bridge today, there were more women than men, more from an older generation. But these crowds defied easy definition. This family were Kenyans, hoping to become British.
It's great to be here, to feel part and parcel of the heritage, the country, and feel honoured, really.
Talking to crowds like this, you discover many different reasons for being here, but one seems to stand out, and that is identity. For a significant number of people, their sense of what being British is linked to occasions like this. Some saw something peculiarly British in being willing to queue for hours.